How much cheese is too much cheese before a date? Any amount of cheese is too much cheese before a date.
That's pretty cheesy. Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cheese, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. UberBear, and today I'm joined by the Cheddar, the worst host in the world.
I'm looking for him. I don't see them.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yes, Anthony, you put your hand on my shoulder. Yeah, no, don't think of yourself like that, okay? You'll do. Hey, it's Stu.
So, hang on. I have a question about the cheese real quick.
Okay.
How do you expect me to follow up from that? Anybody? Look, I get one. I get one this episode.
That's it. You've used it.
So, Chris, welcome.
Yes. Happy to be here.
Our peasant god, our pauper god.
At Sammich.
My cube coach, Sammich. Literally, the man responsible for fixing all of Anthony's cubes is now in the room. Thank you, Chris. So we have
Try to help out where I can.
We have I say they're all interesting episodes because I say this every time. Like, they're all interesting to me, mostly because I'm writing them and I'm hoping that when we're talking about these, they find them equally interesting. So by putting words like it's cool, it's interesting, it's really like trying to lift the room up. But we're going to talk about kind of a concept, and I'm going to refer to it as the 5 orbits. And the gist of this idea, this epiphany that came upon me was, what if we set basically the power band of your cube, the center, the mean, where the intent is, and as I was kind of pre-gaming, poppers and peasants and even the Fey cube, it's easier to figure out what your baseline power level is. Like, what's level 1 of that cube? And we're going to take it and we're going to move through various steps. But before we go any further down this conversation, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. And we're going to start out with our pauper god.
Yeah, so today I decided I have this Powers Irish whiskey. I don't know, looked interesting
that
at the
sounds
store.
way better than what I'm
Never had
drinking.
it before. Never had it before. Decided to try it. The hell? It was not very expensive. That's why I tried it. It's all right. It's all right so far.
It's okay. It's okay. Did the shelf
Fair.
fall over whenever you took it out? Did like the whole thing just spill over into the floor?
Yeah, did you have to blow the dust off the bottle cap before you could open it up and drink it?
Yeah.
That means it's
I
worth
drank a
more
lot
than
lately.
it's secretly worth.
I still
more.
have that bottle of Buffalo Trace that I'm gonna bring with us to CubeCon.
There we go. There we go. All right, May, what are you having on this wonderful Friday late afternoon?
I am actually having a raspberry rocket pop quirk.
That sounds delicious.
Ooh.
We got to find.
Yeah,
these
it's a
quirk
seltzer
things.
that tastes like a rocket pop.
I've never had quirks. I'm going to
that
put
like
out a
the
request to
ice
you.
cream
Please
that you
bring
get
me
at
a
the-
quirk of some variety.
Yeah,
to keep going.
it's like those ice cream sticks that you get on like ice cream trucks and whatnot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I remember
It's
those
very
as a kid.
summery.
Yeah.
I feel like I've missed out.
Yeah. What are you having, Stu?
Today, I have myself Boonshine Brewing Company, and this is their Hatchet Coffee Porter. What about yourself?
I've got an Oscar Blues. They have a Mystic Mutant IPA. It's their series number 5.
Experimental.
I'm about to experiment. Here we go. All right, let's crack them open and let's get to this weird topic. All right, Stu, I kind of briefed you on what we're talking about. May, I also did the same for you. Chris is playing catch up as we go. He walks in and he says, "Hey, I don't have any show notes. What are we even talking about?" I'm like, "Don't worry about it. We'll get you there."
Pretty much.
So, May,
We're professionals here.
You're
Professionals.
passing the
Absolutely.
baton, so to speak.
May, you got the gist of the rundown of what I'm trying to accomplish. You want to do a little summary here, see what you can do with it? Run with it?
Sure. So, from what I'm gathering, is that we're essentially talking about the power outliers in an environment. And, intentionally keeping those power outliers. Yeah? Nah?
No, we're agreeing. We're just waiting. I thought you were pulling
Nope.
from the heavens
Nope.
more thought, so we were waiting.
Nope. Just
That's a good gist.
I think that's the fastest way to say it.
So if I had to take the core elements of a cube, and this is, like I said before in the preamble here, it's easier. We'll just say a popper cube. We'll use a popper cube as a baseline conversation. So Chris being the popper god has a really good subjective idea of where that center right down the middle power band lies. Even as we go up the mana curve, he can just kind of say, well, this card's not, it's kind of Goldilocks-ish, right? This card's not too strong. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's kind of just right. That's kind of what I'm saying. We're going to call that like a level 1 on a matrix, but we're going we're going to do orbits in your mind, right? So everybody picture the core of the Earth or whatever you need to do a center, a circle, and we're going to expand out from that circle. And then we go 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the reason why I did that is just for a clear set definition, mostly nomenclature coinage as we kind of have this conversation because people like to tag ideas. But if I had to go to the outer power bands of a cube, I think it's safe to say the number 5. You can pick any multiplier you want. It doesn't particularly matter much. But I'm just using this to say you've now reached, I guess, you've expanded past the ionosphere. You're now going out into outer space.
So 5 being the top end is what you're talking about.
Conversation.
1 being kind of like your, I don't want to say filler because that's really more like a limited kind of term, I feel, but your supportive cards.
Correct.
Okay.
So let's kind of do this. And I know I'm realizing I'm not going to go to the number 5, but maybe I could. I could theoretically go to the number 5. Let's say for a mental image for players to understand what I'm trying to say, let's put cancel at level 1. The card cancel, literally counter target spell. You pay 2 mana, 1 colorless. Got it. Everybody moving on. But if you went one step higher than that, you would use the card dissolve. Now it looks like cancel, but now it has scry 1 tacked on it. So we've kind of went up an element of 1, if you will, in power level-esque.
I don't know if I would say that may be like a 0.3 of a jump, but I think even those little incremental differences in power level can have an impact, right? So, but I understand what you're saying. You're moving up that power band, right? You've gone from that flat 1, which is a cancel. Now you're moving just up a little bit, right? So then where do you go?
Let's go to level 3 and just say straight up counter spell. It's just a hard counter, pay 2 blue. It's a good way of just seeing this. Because we can all argue that counterspell is better than cancel. We can even argue that counterspell is better than dissolve. Agreed?
Yes.
Right? Because you're paying less mana.
Was there an argument? Where's the debate?
We'll find one somewhere. But then you
don't get to scry with counterspell, so obviously dissolve is way more powerful.
And then you try to jump up to the next one, and we'll say mana drain. Now I'm hitting that level 4, that level 5 of really testing the boundaries. If my center was cancel, if I'm running cancel and I'm also running mana drain, we can now see the orbits are now pushing. We're starting to push into outer space. So we understand the analogy I'm working with here?
Yes, and I would like to see the list that has both dissolve or even cancel and mana drain.
I'm working on it.
I hope you're not.
But you can see,
that can exist in a peasant environment if you wish it to.
It could.
Because mana drain is definitely peasant legal.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point you bring. And actually, we'll do a little flashback. Well, that's a good point, because we kind of talked about that when we went into the Peasant Plus cube that I played at Capital Cube Champs. And I kind of told you my experience was Sylvan Library was in there, Demonic Tutor was in there. That's a fine example of kind of what we're talking about, where the elements of the cube were kind of, the expected was 1 to 3 on a level scale, but sometimes we got the 4, the 5, and we went into something extraordinary past that. Because, as you said,
because you can run things like Library of Alexandria, you can run the strip mine. All those things are legal in a peasant environment,
right?
And which are fine if that is your goal. In my opinion, if that's your goal with the peasant cube, that's awesome. That's great. You have access to all these really fun cards. But the way I've always looked at those is you might as well just build an unpowered cube at that point. That's the way, that's kind of the way I always look at it.
Yeah, I think you're on that little line in the pool where it says you're in the shallow end, you're deep end. Just climb over that line at that point. I agree.
You're right there. You're right there. You're almost there, buddy. Just go ahead. You can do this.
You can do this. You can
proxy those Moxen, baby. Don't hold back.
But this episode is not to discourage the power spikes. Actually, it's the opposite. The reason why I just did the numbering system is just to give a clear picture. But on the other hand, I'm going to encourage people to put in cards that are outliers, to put in cards that are known power spikes. And that's what we're going to talk about as we progress. Everybody tracking the 5 orbits? Raise your hand if you disagree with me.
I'm hearing you on FM.
All right, cool.
You.
All right, so that's kind of it. So let's kind of define that 5 orbit a little cleaner. At least, I tried to put something to words here the best I could. So I said level 1 was a baseline. It's an average power level. It's the center of your power band. So you, the curator, are looking at it the best you can. Removing mana curve from the equation, it's still, this line can still track through that mana curve. It can follow it like a bell curve, like a parabola as it moves up. Everybody tracking? As you move up, you could theoretically have a flat line moving in those stages as well.
I think years ago you could have probably made an argument that there's some correlation between mana value and power. I don't think you can do that anymore. Certainly if you're not looking historically over the last 30 years, because the 2s and 3 drops and the 4 drops of 10, 15, 20 years ago are certainly not the 1 and 2 drops even of 2023/2024. So yes, I agree. Not a good indication of power level.
Okay, but looking at a card from an individual spectrum of what the card does, right? We got our Rabble Master variants. We've got our 2/1s for 1. We know all these, but in their little self-contained units, they have their own little incremental power level that are, if you're willing to give them grace, they are stepping up. Right? That's what we're looking at. You go from mana value 1, these are the most powerful subset. Mana value 2, this is the most powerful. You see where I'm going with this? 3.
Right.
And so there's an incremental growth that will occur that you have to give grace to. But still, even that, there's a medium line that continues to go up.
It does. And it has done. Certainly at a much higher level over the last few years, I would say.
Agreed. So then level 2 is kind of what I'm defining. And this is where it gets murky, right? But I'm trying to say, like, it draws interesting plays into the game. Interaction. Plays to the strength of a color, for instance. Like, when I kind of use the example, say, cancel versus counterspell versus mana drain. It's still in the strength of the color, but you can see there's gains. There's 100% step ups as we move through that tier. Anybody have anything to offer about that?
So basically, level 1 would be kind of your Colonian Tusker kind of power level.
That's right.
And level 2 would be your Scavenging Ooze.
Yes. Now you're tracking what I'm saying in so many words, right? Because you've now moved into more interaction, more capability.
And I'm always going to
drop
like
a level 1 being your sea level cards that will almost always make the deck. They're good. They're role fillers. They do what you need to do. And then the other, you get up to things like the counter spells. That's where you have all the different options, and you can choose to go up or down in power level based on that. I think I'm following what you're saying. Yeah,
I like the sea level, actually. That's a really good analogy. And then you kind of move into level 3. We're getting into our closure cards, right? Our game-changing or stabilizing cards. The thing that's either, for whatever reason, the text on the card, or the power level, the attributes of the card, or even the casting cost of the card. Something about this has made this card, it stand out from the ones beneath it, right? We can use like a Wrath of God versus a Fumigate.
I was going to make that exact same point, right? Your typical 4 mana. Even you could go upper level and you could say like your 3 mana Wrath-ish kind of effects, right? Like Toxic Deluge as an example. Correct. Versus like your Damnation or your Wrath of God. So yeah.
Yeah, so that actually has a whole spectrum in itself too. And you have to treat these as what the card does versus where it lands on the orbit. That's kind of a consideration here too.
Speed has got to be a pretty significant consideration. I know that you could maybe argue that there's parallels that you would draw between the two. Like if a card is equal but one is faster than the other in any capacity, then you're going to give the slight edge to that. And even the mana value just really encompasses that.
May, do you have anything in particular that draws comparisons for you on that level in your mind?
So I think that it's important to keep in mind that when we're assigning these numbers, that it can be kind of arbitrary, but we can say that we all understand what we're conceptually talking about, where it's just like, yes, this is a step less efficient than insert good card here, or this new good card here is a step above previous okay card there, right? But I think that within the context of like your own environment, it's important to ask what the context is for when you're needing it to be, say, a counterspell versus a cancel, or cancel versus cancel with upside.
I would agree. And I think you put you hit the nail on the head again when you said the word arbitrary. This is frankly arbitrary. Like Chris and I had this conversation recently. We don't think about this. We have been, all of us in this room have either been playing Magic or doing this for so long. We don't need a number system. We don't need a batch. We don't need to have elements. We don't need these things. But I think it's good to at least have, sometimes when you've been doing something for so long, and I know this from my career, when you've been doing it for so long, when you try to explain to somebody how you do something, you don't realize how many steps you're skipping to explain it to them because you've become so efficient at any of our careers. And this is for the listeners. Think about that. Like, you do a job. You're really good at your job. And as you age in your job, you get better and better at your job. Then you bring in the new person in your job, and they're always wondering, how did you get so good at your job? And you try to explain it to them, but you're trying to give them like a pitch, like a bit, like you're trying, this is why. But ultimately, you can just say, well, I've been doing it for 27 years. If I'm not doing it good by now, you would think. And we're doing this with curation as well, too. Chris has been curating. May's been curating forever. Stu's working on the idea, and he plays our cubes. He sees these lines, but we never stop. You said this before, man. I always appreciate this. We're looking at the forest of trees, but we never actually stop to look at the tree. That's what I'm trying to say, right? Let's pump the brakes.
I'll add to that a little bit. As much as, right, May, you said arbitrary. Chris, you were nodding your head. Anthony, you've used the same word, right? So I will say this. After the time I've spent the last few months, and it's had its pauses here or there, working on the Doom Cube, which has been well documented for the last few years at this point, it's amazing how I would imagine that you, probably all three of you, take a lot of that for granted, right? The stuff that we're talking about now, I'm nodding and agreeing because I understand that we've discussed these processes for the last 2 years that we've done this podcast and previously. But when I'm sitting there looking at Cube Cobra and I'm looking at Scryfall and I'm looking at these cards, it's quite easy for me and humbling in a way for me to look at them and say, man, it's so difficult for me as a noob to even conceptualize the cube that I'm building, that I have in front of me and all these cards, and even think about the power level across the board. Like, I'm still not experienced enough to be able to understand, even just being able to retain that and maintain that thought process while I'm evaluating. I'm talking about new cards, and a lot of the time I'm just kind of throwing them in there. But that process, that mindset of being able to take into consideration, forget five power bands, I'm just trying to think of one general one for the cube overall. So it's so true that you say that, because that's not something that necessarily will come organically if you're newer to it, but with that experience, it's got to be so invaluable.
I think that what's important that a lot of newer curators understand, that it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to not quite understand what your power level looks like or quite what your power band is at the moment.
Yes, I have no idea.
Yeah. Getting your idea into paper and into your cube is going to be the first step. What we're talking about is you already have a list together, and at this point you're just trying to refine it to make it better. And I think that it's easy for us to kind of sit here and talk about how easy it is for us to identify, you know, whether or not a cube needs counterspell or whether or not it needs cancel, right? But it is significantly harder for us to determine whether or not a cube needs, let's take the Fey Cube, for example, whether or not the Fey Cube needs Rabblemaster or Battlecry Goblin, right?
Right. Tight.
That is a significantly harder question.
Right.
So let's kind of stem over to orbit number 4, right? And where I'm getting is now we're edging into that watch list now. These are cards that when you put them in for the first time, you kind of already know. You feel, you sense. You have like a fundamental understanding that this card is a little fish out of water. And it's going to be higher tiered. But the way I'm putting level 4 is it's able to be stopped.
Right.
Right? It promotes interaction in some form. Like, it's vulnerable, but yet definitely screaming that it's stronger than the rest of it. It's the horse of many colors, but it's still able to be shut down, right? It's a little different.
Right.
So orbit number 4 is pretty standard, but then we go to level 5. And again, I want to reiterate, we're encouraging the testing of these waters, the push, right? We do want to see like the anomalies, the spikes, where you, the curator, with intent, do put a few cards that do kind of traverse outside of these lanes. Because if we step back for a minute, we went to level 1, we know that's the flattest power band in the universe. And we've talked about this before, where you can actually experience a cube where everything is just really flat, everything's very vanilla or French vanilla, and nothing happens. No interaction, standstill games. You suddenly get one flyer that steps up, or that one little orbit higher than the others, and you now are hitting them for 2, whereas before everybody's just locking horns.
I was going to, imagine if it was just every card was a 2-card threat or a 2-card counterspell, or a 3-card threat or a 3-card counterspell. Something along those lines, right? Now you're, like you say, you've got those button heads. The power band is very, very flat in a way, and and not to mention that would be incredibly unfun.
Correct. So the intent of this episode is to encourage diversity, providing this like level or orbiting system that we're going. So let's step to level 5. These are extreme power outliers. You've kind of moved past watch list and you've chosen, you see the stop sign, but you're going to run it anyways. And you're doing it with intent, and it's going to require play testing feedback from your players to decide if this card actually belongs. But this would be an example in Uber Bear's Artifact Cube. It's come up to me all the time. Why don't you run Skull Clamp? Chris and May, how do you feel about Skull Clamp?
Yeah, so with Skull Clamp, I ran that in my Peasant Cube briefly, very briefly. And that card is busted in that Peasant Cube. I'm not sure if May has run it in hers. I don't know if you ever ran it in your cube, but it was a broken card.
It's pretty busted in everything, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. And it's innocuous.
Even in the Powered Vintage Cube, it's really good.
Yeah.
So, yep.
And
I think I tried to run it in my Storytime Cube, and then I ended up needing to take it out.
Yeah.
Which was my equivalent to a Brawl Cube. For context.
It's something like that looks so benign. So a player sees Skull Clamp and they see no harm, no foul. All it really does is what? +1 the creature, so they see it from the attack.
+1, -1.
Yeah, but it's the drawing that lets you have it. The engine, right? You start putting in cards that are making tokens, that are 1/1s, and players are going to capitalize on those weaknesses of those cards. And it looks simple. It looks like it's fine, but it's not.
I'm going to say no disrespect, but I think you kind of have to have lived under a rock. There's nothing more satisfying than putting it, maybe other than putting it on a 1/1 and just drawing 2 cards, but there's something so nice about putting it on like a 2/2, and now you're hitting for 3 a turn. It's like, do you really want to take that 3 damage, but do you really want me to draw 2 more cards? Because, this was just a lowly 2/2, but if you block it, I get 2 cards. And
so
yeah, it's
let's keep the orbit number 5 alive. So, what would be some things that would, classify me? I've stepped beyond the watch list. I'm doing this with intent. I know these cards are mildly egregious, but I'm still encouraging it to happen to some degree. It'd be cards that have protection, or cards that are indestructible, or cards that are hexproof with great stats, or some combo point that May's going to allude to here shortly that's game closing and it's standalone in its own way that maybe players don't know about. These are kind of just like the high level of Magic cards that are hidden within the flattest power band, and you don't want to have, in my opinion, too many spikes, but I encourage a certain amount of spikes because players want to play Magic. They want to do fun things.
They want to do big things.
They want to do big things, splashy. They don't want to win the game with just a 2/2 flyer.
No.
They want to have this victory that's so cool, totalitarian victory, right? May.
So I think that an important example that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about this is let's say we had a cube of, 100 ornithopters. Right?
Knew that was coming. Knew it.
The difference between each of those ornithopters is the same. Any level of variance is the same. But those cards that affect those ornithopters are different, and that's where you have to consider, where that variance is coming into play and whatnot. If it was just, here are a bunch of things that are about the same power level and then a bunch of ornithopters, it'd be a very boring cube. But that's not what it is, right? So it's important that when you are intentionally putting in these outliers, which is a good thing, when you are putting it in, you are putting it in with the intent of this lets players do big things. This lets players do some specific deck. It lets them do more from the tools that you've given them. So even though, yes, in the pack it's out of place, but it's out of place with intent. And that's a good thing.
So a real world example, my family and I, we lived in Orlando for a long time, and we had season passes to SeaWorld. And when you go to SeaWorld, when you're new, one of the big things you have as a consumer, as a tourist, is an option. You go to see Shamu or the seals or whatever you're seeing right at the time.
I got to see Shamu.
Right, I did too before Shamu did things, before the things happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But one of the options you had was to give you a rain jacket, a slicker. And now you get to choose. I can sit in the high stands, and I can still see Shamu. Shamu's out there doing the Shamu things, and all the people are performing and all that.
But you're not getting wet.
You're not getting wet. But you got, it's 10:30 in the morning. I want to feel the experience. I want to sink my teeth into it. I'm going to go sit in the splash zone.
I mean, how often in your life are you going to get to have a whale splash water on you?
Okay, so that's kind of...
I want a whale splashing water on me. That's the experience that I want when I sit down and draft your cube. Give me the whale tail and the water splash.
And 35 minutes later, you have total regret. You're trying to find your locker so you can get fresh clothes. But this is kind of what I'm trying to say is players want to experience the cube. I love the fact, May, that you brought up 100 ornithopters, because that could be the flattest baseline until you do the improvements to the actual ornithopters.
I'm thinking like a heart meter, when it's got the little boop.
Yep.
And then it's flat lines, and there's your ornithopters. And then it goes boop, and there's like a cauldron complete. And then you go boop. And
let's say that this was just 100 ornithopters with the only variance being shocks and giant growths. That's it. Those are the 3 cards of the entire cube, right? It'd be a very boring cube. Like, I'd barely say it's a cube at that point. At that point, it should have just been a wizard tower. But it's not. And when you are looking at cards that are potentially going to be outliers for your cube, you want to ask, how does this get the game going? How do players feel when they're choosing this? How do they feel when they're playing this?
And how they feel when they're playing against it, too.
Yeah.
That's another thing. You want to make sure people are having fun, even if they're losing to it. And that's a hard pill to swallow for certain people to understand.
It is.
I got wrecked last night playing against some stuff, but it was it was so fun to get wrecked by this deck that Bill, who built this amazing red-green deck in my peasant cube. But I had a blast getting just destroyed by this deck. But that's what I'm going for.
Can I want to make this statement as well. I hear people say that, right? I love to get wrecked by this interesting deck. When I hear that most often is by someone who's talking about someone who's built a deck in their cube, right? So Chris, yeah, fun for you to see someone build this fun and broken deck in your cube. But let's talk about your cube and a deck or a card in particular that I got absolutely demolished with. And yeah, it was absolutely no fun for me.
And we're going to kind of tread lightly on the 3, 4s, and 5s. And so what I'm going to ask the group to do is, we talked about the orbit system. We're now on we're going past the hemisphere. We're up in the ionosphere. You got where we're going here, right? So we're going to do, when we're done, I would like to ask the group to say, is that a 3, 4, or 5, based on the context of the environment.
Of the cube, yes.
Yeah, so present your argument.
All right, so the card I'm going to talk about, this one doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, is in Sammich's Peasant Cube, and it's Mother of Runes. 1 white, human cleric, tap, target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. It's a 1/1. Very famous card. Yeah, this was absolutely the least fun I've had in quite some time, and it just led to a non-game. Just straight up. Unbeatable. Couldn't do anything about it. Needs multiple spells to get around it, unless you're like comboing off or, you've got a really wide board presence or something like that. And yeah, it just didn't happen.
Chris, defend.
Well, I'm not going to defend it. Mother of Runes is a very strong card. It's an exceedingly strong card. The thing is, Stu, if you can do this for me, if you can get Wizards to get them to print Giver of Runes at Uncommon, I'll gladly swap this out for that.
That kind of should tell you something.
White needs this, man. White needs this.
Kind of should tell you that you would prefer to put a vastly inferior card in the cube, right? And no hatred for Giver of Runes fans stands out there, right? I like Giver of Runes, but Giver of Runes is vastly inferior to Mom. And that kind of is telling to me that you're, and that this just how it seems or how it sounds, right? That you're putting Mother of Runes at a much higher power band than you are Giver of Runes, and you're saying that Giver of Runes would be more appropriate for the environment, and Mother of Runes is in there because you want that kind of effect, possibly, or because it's legal, and yet it's only in there because a better option isn't available, even though that option is a power outlier.
So from a flavor standpoint, May and I actually joked about this recently. I had a listener that kind of reached out and said, why aren't you running Mother Runes in the Fem Cube? And from a flavor standpoint, it's just writhing with flavor. Like, this would be the perfect card, but it would also be devastating in that environment. I know this. People know this. We acknowledge this. I did actually go with the Giver of Runes option because I'm not following... Chris is a peasant purist. We've kind of talked about this before. Or excuse me. Yeah, peasant purist. In the sense that he's not breaking those Peasant Plus rules that we talked about that I experienced with all these high-powered cards. It's very much following the rules that are provided by the rarity symbols. I will say that I, too, have had a similar experience where against Christian, there was nothing I could do. There's no point of interaction for me. There's no layering. All I could do truly is hope that he didn't draw this card. Or I could get it when it came out, and I had to have that either cancel, counterspell, whatever you needed, right? And or some removal spell before the ability to tap this card. But once it was online, this game was closed out.
That's an interesting parallel that you draw, right? And this is something we talked about in the pregame. And this is why I dislike playing somewhat control-y decks in a lot of cubes, right? Because it's not a winning line for me to hold up 3 mana for my cancel. As powerful as Mother of Runes is, you cannot, for the length of a game or a match, hold up 3 mana for the purpose of trying to just get rid of a 1 mana spell. It's just not possible as a winning line, in my opinion. You need to use your mana. I think in these kind of environments, the player that uses their mana each turn and develops their board presence is typically, in my experience, the player that's going to win.
May, your own deck. We're doing the show intervention right now.
So
I heard my feelings.
This intervention's been going on for about 2 years now, so don't feel bad.
So I'm definitely going to step on some toes with this, but I have a similar feeling for like how many cubes run Lightning Bolt.
Yes. Well, you're not going to argue. I'm not arguing. I'm done. You actually win. I've seen it. I agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the reason why is that when we're looking at Mom or Lightning Bolt or whatever, in the vacuum, they're just good cards. But when you're taking it in the context of your cube, they go from, yeah, they're good cards to these things kind of run over the entire format. And it kind of feels like a disrespect of their power to equate them to, say, cancel. And it's important as a designer to keep those types of things in mind when you're designing your environment. But that's not to say that it can't be, let's say, a good choice to put in. So I will say that Mom does do a specific role that is difficult to fill in white, but that's not to say that it can't be filled in white, right? So, like, let's say if I added the 1 mana sacrifice, give something protection from a color until end of turn, right?
Benevolent bodyguard.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. That one. That one is significantly worse than Mom, but it introduces more lines of interaction. So for the 1 turn that you're needing that Mom effect, then yes, it can do effectively for that 1 turn the same thing. But anything past that, it's no longer online. Mom is a consistent threat. And that is kind of where you have to ask yourself as the designer, is this the type of threat that's important for the environment as opposed to an alternative?
What are your thoughts, Chris?
Well, I totally understand where everybody's coming from, and I don't have any problem with what y'all are saying. It's just my issue is, say I cut Mom. Okay, I cut Mom. Then, I put in Devil Bodyguard, which is fine. I run it in my Pauper Cube. I think it's a fine card. I really do like the card. I think it's a great one. But the thing about it is, I think for the decks that I want that for Mom to be in, first of all, they're usually very aggressive. The decks that Mom is going to be in. I think this kind of effect is kind of necessary for some of these things. Is she very powerful? Absolutely. And does it make some people feel bad occasionally? Yeah, Stu, sorry, Mom touched you in a way
Anthony,
that was
Anthony
wrong.
also, yes.
Yeah.
Anthony, I'm not sorry about that.
Anthony can cope, seethe, and mauled.
Probably, Anthony, you probably deserved it. Anyway, so
yes,
anyway,
Anthony always deserves it.
Now I'm going to hit you with the take that these two haven't said. That's okay.
About what?
I'm saying that it's okay that you want to have Mom for that purpose.
Yeah,
and it's okay that you want that for your environment. And saying that is an identity-defining part of your environment, that's an okay position to take.
Why do you hate your players?
Yeah, I never.
Why do you guys hate your players so much?
I never see it ended
Why do
up.
I hate
It never
I don't
ends
hate
up
my
in the
players.
intended deck. Like the idea is that it lets aggression go through, and I can get that. I'm down with that. Like that makes sense to me. I've never faced against that. Instead, I see like, I don't know, I can't deal with this Thopter of some variety that has nothing to do with aggression. It's a control player that grabs these cards because this card is very homogenous in the sense. I know aggression wants this card, but a control player also really wants this card to keep their threat so they can just defend till the end of time, right? So,
I think efficiency with a repeatable effect is what makes this card so difficult, right? Especially with any and don't get me wrong, the Peasant Cube is strong. It's not that there's no power, higher powered cards, right? It's not a vintage environment, but it's still not a low power necessarily environment. But we go even all the way back to the whole Trigon Predator discussion that we had about the Artifact Cube. It's
right.
not that there is a creature. If Trigon Predator was when this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it and destroy an artifact or even destroy 2 artifacts, that would be incredibly powerful. 2 would be maybe a bit bonkers, but that kind of effect would be fine. The fact that you've got this repeatable effect that's so efficient and so very difficult to deal with is what I think makes this such a very, very high power outlier in the cube.
So I think that it's important to keep in mind, us 3 in particular, that having format defining cards is not always a bad thing. It's just kind of what the environment supports. For example, if you go into a vintage cube, you expect the power 9, right? In the same way, if you go into Sammich's peasant cube, you have to expect the mom.
Why?
Okay.
I don't want to expect mom.
So
I want mom to go back.
This is not the mom episode. This is strangely become the mom
serving
episode.
tea. She's serving tea.
So
all right.
I do have a reason that I'm putting it in that context. Because when you, as a curator, and this is me talking to the listeners, right? When you, as a curator, are wanting to have those format defining cards, if you've asked yourself all those questions above and decided, I don't care, I still want this to be in here because X, Y, and Z, because it's what I want my environment to feel like, then having a way to translate that to your players, for example, in the Fey Cube, what I do is that I have a little marker that says star. So all the cards that are outliers are highlighted. And you can also just have like an information card that you can give out ahead of the draft or whatnot of, hey, these are like the big cards you should be looking out for and whatnot. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, especially when it's done by intention. Right?
I'm gonna disagree, and the reason is I don't think the intent or the desire to include a card can mean that it's a healthy addition for an environment. And I think that's so critical from a player enjoyment. And I typically come from that perspective, right? I don't care sometimes that I feel bad, but I will always take note if I've got multiple people, right? We can go back to Trigon Predator. We can go back to our friend Jason's cube. He put Umezawa's Jite in one of his cubes and multiple people were like, yo.
That was Nathan.
Nathan, correct. Yeah. We were like, Nathan, you cannot include Jite in this cube. It's absolutely bonkers broken. You got to take it out. He took it out. The environment was better for it. So I think if you've got multiple players saying this card is not healthy due to efficiency, repeatable effects, power outliers, which I will, I'm giving this opinion on Mother of Runes, and I love that Anthony's put it in there because he knows how I feel about this cube in the environment. I think if you have that opinion from multiple players and you have a card that this is not some, oh man, like maybe okay, but I don't like. No, Mother of Runes is in the vintage cube for a damn good reason. It's a very, very, very powerful card. But just saying I want to include it because I feel like it's part of the identity of the cube, then I think, or I want to put it in there, right? For some, for whatever reason, maybe that's problematic in and of itself from a design perspective.
So Mother of Runes has hijacked my entire episode. So this, I laid this out. Let's just call a number here.
This is a great, but it's for a good reason, I think, because this is now evaluation of power and an emotional attachment to a card.
But there's more cards that are going to be really sad if I don't talk about them.
All right, talk about your sad cards.
I'm putting this from my perspective as a level 5. I think this card, frankly, agreeing with Chris, does have an acceptance level. It's okay. But it is definitely the highest tier of the power band of this cube. Chris, do you agree with that statement?
No denying that. I'm not here denying that Mother of Runes is less powerful than it actually is. But the way I've always felt about these kind of cards is that you're always going to have a powerful card. You're always going to have the most powerful card. It doesn't matter. You can remove all of the cards that everyone says are the most powerful card, and there'll always be one that will slide right into place. So it's just that, you have to draw the line somewhere, and I decided to draw the line at Mother of Runes and leave it there. And, it's just, yes, it is a powerful card. It is quote-unquote repeatable, but it does involve a tap to do it. You usually can't do it multiple times in a turn. Sometimes it'll take multiple removal spells to do it. And just keep in mind, you can always respond to that activation of Mother of Runes. It goes on the stack. It's not like it gives it automatically. And I know that's the dice to removal crap argument you hear all the damn time. But, it's just, I feel like, yes, it is a level 5 card according to Anthony's thing, but it is not so egregious. And I know I'm in the minority with peasant cubers.
Responds, flashes in Pestermite. All right, next card.
Yeah, that'd be amazing since it's not in the cube. I'd love to see that.
Craig Boone. Let's talk about Craig Boone, Chris. Let's just give a quick little summary on Craig Boone.
Sure. Craig Boone is a 1 for red and a white for a 3/3 reach lifelink. This is, of course, from a Universes Beyond the Fallout set. He's one of my favorite followers in New Vegas, by the way. So he has something called 1 for my body. One for my
baby. For my baby. Sorry, not for your body. That's weird.
One for my baby. Whenever you attack with 2 or more target creatures, put 2 quest counters on Craig Boone. Novak Guard. When you do, Craig Boone deals damage equal to a number of quest counters on it, up to 1 target creature, unless its controller has Craig Boone deal that much damage to them.
Yep.
And now I will not deny that Universes Beyond has added some very powerful cards to all formats that they're legal in. This one is definitely on a watch list. For right now, it's still in. It probably will make it to CubeCon because I'm really interested to see what people will do with this monstrosity here. And
I did things with it one day to Anthony here, who was like, "This card is nonsense. Why is this card?" As it was just like, "Yeah, oh, what's that?
It feels like it should have been rare."
Yeah, you got a board there.
Oh, absolutely. Look at how many words are on this thing. Look at how many words are on it.
So many words.
3/3
And the fact that it deals damage and gets lifelink is just like, oh, whoa, what?
Yeah.
It just seems like it can scale a game out of control so fast.
Because it does 2, then 4, then 6, then 8.
Lifelink, let's not forget, it's it doing the damage, so when it does the damage, it's lifelink.
Absolutely. You get
let's not forget that your lifelink
powerful.
Is just making your life totals go nuclear as well. So
and like the problem child gut that I just recently cut. It doesn't have to attack either. I love gut too. Don't get me wrong.
So we're going to short time here a little bit, though. So I actually have 4 cards, but I'm going to cut it down to 2 for Uberbear's Artifact Cube. But I encourage you to look at the show notes because I've identified 4. But I have 2 cards out of these 4 that I want to talk about. And the first one is going to be Scorpith Lord, and it's also Universes Beyond. And it is a Necron Noble, and it has Menace. But here's the thing that really, Pleasant Kenobi played my cube. And I think his words were, this was total BS. Like, either he was playing against his card, he's like, why is this happening? And actually, whenever I played Dozer's Cube in the Capital Cube Championships, I saw this card come up again. I'll use this as my own personal validation that this card's okay, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you this card's probably not okay. But I will say this is my level 5. I will announce it now. It has the ability for Menace. It is a 3/2. But it has this effect that says Command Protocols. Other artifact creatures you control get +1, +0, and have Menace. And it has an Earth for 2 colorless and 1 black.
Which is also its CMC.
It is waves of hurt coming at you.
Menace is so
This card's great.
difficult
Love
to
it.
deal with.
Don't ever cut this card. I love it.
I'm not cutting it. I need a game finisher. But this is my level 5. I've already DEFCON 5 here. So I acknowledge that.
It's basically mini hoof that you can just bring back.
This card's awesome. This card is awesome. That Menace is so much better than you think it is. It's so good.
It's so problematic.
Based on the statements that we received, even with Pleasant Kenobi was talking about, and basically you can hear where Chris is like, don't cut this card. That kind of goes into the idea where like the opponent's a little jovial from losing to this. They may not be at the time, but they understand why this card must exist. because you know that black artifacts aren't that great generally. Black struggles in this environment. It's kind of the same argument that Chris made with Mother of Runes. I need something to do a certain effect that defines an archetype.
I don't disagree, but this is a 1 black pip that just makes all of your creatures very, very, very difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
I feel like...
Watch this in a...
I don't feel like you can put a card in like this and just be like, hey, this is my support for black.
No, I just want to win the game. We're done.
Exactly.
The game's over. I
want
want
to win the game, and I want to win the game for 3 mana. So in that power band consideration for the rest of your cube, if you have other 3 mana cards that come in and like, I am basically threatening to end the game right here, right now, then okay, cool. Like that's very fair. Like that's where your CMC is for these kind of bombs. But if not, then this would be considered a huge power outlier.
This is a 5. This is a comfortable 5 for me on that orbit. Just not even.
I agree with Stu. I think that that's what's important to keep in mind with, yes, I'm bringing back up Mother of Runes, God forbid. But when you are intentionally adding these power outliers, you know, asking yourself where it fits in with the rest of the environment and what makes it an outlier is going to be important for you, the listener, to determine what's good for the health of your cube, what's interesting for the health of your cube, and Scorpeth is a way that you could just have a card that says, yep, I am winning the game.
I win unless you deal with this. And if you have a mothering room,
deal with it twice.
You have to deal with it twice.
Yeah.
If you have a mom, you have to deal with it 3 times because of the unearth. Yikes.
So let's kind of move over this next one. This is a recent addition. This is the Fish Out of Water, and I have already seen broken, cool things happen. I've also had feedback before I announced this card that they didn't mind losing to this because the Johnny, player go burr, the brain is on fire, right? May, Metalworker. What do you think about that?
Look, I love Metalworker.
I feel like everybody
but
loves
Metalworker is one of those cards that when somebody's drafting this, they are not intending to do fair things with it, and that's kind of what you have to keep in mind when you are putting like this in. But I think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, so this is level 5.
I think this card's great for the environment. I think it's great.
Yeah, so I've seen players play it, and they've lost to it. But I think what I've observed, even at UberCubeathon, and I've brought it to other events, and we played it amongst ourselves, when people lose to this, they enjoy almost watching, like May saying, well, I'm going to reveal these 3 artifacts. I'm adding 6 mana to my environment, whatever, to my pool. And something about this just kind of... I don't know. You're giving away knowledge, the exchange. They like seeing you get Triplicate Titan out. It's weird. It's so strange to me.
I'm going to give you one hell of a take. All right? In your environment, Metalworker has the same impact as the previous card. Scorpec, Lord.
Scorpec.
Scorpica.
Scorpec.
I think it's just Scorpec. I don't know.
Scorpico in that
I
thing.
like Scorpec.
But anyways, I would say that those two are at a very similar power level. Of if Metalworker is resolving its effect, then assume that the game's going to be closing very quickly.
Yeah.
In the same way, in the same vein as if you do not deal with Scorpec, Lord, then you got a whole lot of hurt coming.
I feel like having a board presence is not something that I necessarily take for granted, but I assume that I will. Whereas having the appropriate artifact in my hand as well as a payoff for Metalworker is a little less reliable than what Scorpion Lord, I'm calling him Scorpion Lord, is going to bring. So
get over here. All right.
Yeah, get over here. But I think that I agree that they're both super duper powerful cards. And I think that's a cool, like, it's a cool comment that you made about judging these cards because it's not always about that. Like, potential be damned sometimes, right? You could go...
They go into 2 entirely different decks.
100%.
They come down at around the same time and threaten at about the same time.
And they can both go brr, and they can both be like, I win. Right now, forget about it. Super fun. But the Metalworker's nostalgia. I'm convinced
what
of
it
this.
is. That's what
It's
it is.
nostalgia. It's like, man, you remember when Metalworker was in the Vintage Cube, and I would be so excited to get it, and I'm going to go nuts with Browntown. But now, I mean, it's not even in the Power Cube anymore.
No.
Or at least not the Moto one. I don't know how many of our
cut
listeners
it
are. Yeah, I know you guys cut it a long time ago. It just hasn't got it like it used to. But man, when it goes off, when it works, it's so satisfying.
So let's kind of move over to the Fem Cube, the apex predators that I know exist in that cube. And there's a couple of them. And I'm going to kind of class this first one as class 4, orbit 4. The next one will be 100% 5, probably breaching into the space at that point. But Limerith the Desert Doom, it's a 5/5 flyer, and you can actually look at the show notes to see this card and or Scryfall. It has Ward 4 as long as it's not untapped. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Then if you have fewer cards than 3 in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference. This card is a 5/5 flyer that can be dealt with in the environment. I do have adequate flyers. Ward 4 is gross. That's hexproof. We all know this.
As long as it's untapped, so I think that's
Correct.
That's quite significant.
That's why I'm going to give this a tier
Side grade
4.
Uchitai?
But it's kind of the argument that Chris said that I needed something to do with the big mana, even though this is 5. I know this isn't really a lot of mana, but I need something for the control spectrum to have at the high end of its tiers or something to aggressive push, because I do have all the angels and stuff like that in there, Baneslayer, etc. I wanted something that could challenge against, not necessarily Baneslayer, because it will block this for days, but you get where I'm going with this, is I wanted something that could push against that idea. And I played this card over the weekend with my little brother Josh, and we had a great time. But then I paired it with this next card. So my good friend Jordan recommended this to me, like, I don't know, a couple of years ago. I guess it was the Cube Tuber was the video he was running at the time, but it was Dream Trawler. How do you guys feel about this card? And I'm going to keep it no matter what you feel. I'm just going to tell you. I'm the same as, I'm going to die on that hill, same as Chris did with Mother Runes.
Damn right. I think you should definitely keep this card. I mean, it's got a ridiculous mana cost with 2 white and 2 blue, but once you get that
if you
thing
can
down,
hard cast this thing, you earned it.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's a 6 mana. Like, it's not I win the game, but it's pretty close.
It's close.
It's pretty close.
It's pretty close.
Yeah, you better be wrathing this thing, otherwise you're going to have a lot of problems.
I think for your environment, if you're getting up to 6 mana and you're hard casting this thing, you earned it. It's fine. You can take it.
Yeah.
And the fact that it just is so difficult to deal with at that point is just like, yeah, let him have it.
I agree.
Great. I think
totally
that it's
okay
a
with this
perfect
card.
example of an outlier doing its job.
And that's why it was recommended to me, is that it's back to that little, you talked about the heart monitor, we want to see the occasional bumps. And I want to encourage curators to kind of do the bumps. And it's interesting that the dynamic of the association of the mana cost and you paid that much, you've earned it, is associated to this card, right? That's so cool. That's another way of kind of weighing and measuring whether or not this is a class 5, orbit 5 card, but simultaneously, well, you spent a lot of time, you've had all the time, you've hard casted this. Well, GG's. Let's go ahead and shuffle them up, play another game. I'm down for that.
That's exactly right. I feel the same way about Mother of Runes. You pay that 1 mana, it's
hard to get
Pay that one mana, dude. Game's over. Shuffle up. Let's play another one.
Yeah.
You've earned it with the 1 mana.
You had to add a planes to your deck, and that's pretty rough. I get
That's
it.
right. That's right. I mean,
yeah.
you're splashing it. You just put the 1 planes in whenever you splash it. So,
Let's switch over to the Monopoly. So I've got a card that's immediately a watch list. Chris, you want to talk about the Railway Brawler?
Yeah, I love this card. I run this in my Power Cube too. It's a 3 and 2 green for a 5/5 reach trample. I think they give reach to literally every new green card.
Doesn't make any sense.
Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters where X is its power. And the cool part is you can also plot this for 3 and a green. This card is fun. I like it. This card is really fun. I really enjoy it.
I was recently at the Capital Cube Championships, and people said this won games. But I also haven't heard any feedback as of yet that this was a miserable way to lose the game either.
It's 5 mana. Should
bag.
5 mana cards be winning games in your environment? That's the question. So if it should, then
it can be
that's
4
great.
mana, but like
It can
the
be 4
point
mana.
is that
4 mana over 2 turns, or over multiple turns, right? So it's 8 mana total,
Right.
or 4 mana then. In fact, no, it's 4 mana then 5, so it's 9 total. So yes, you do. I think plot is a wonderful mechanic, right? But I think if you're if you're plotting it and then you're giving your opponent that information and then you're playing it and then it's a 5/5 reach trample, which is good stats, but it doesn't have haste. Then you've got to get it out that turn. Do you have enough mana to play another creature and put a bunch of counters on it? And do you have enough money or enough mana to play
money.
A big one? Yeah, treasures money.
Yeah.
So I think it takes a couple of turns to really go bomb style, but I think if you're committing to something like this, and if your opponent's just watching you play, plot a 4-mana spell and then play a 5-mana spell and then play another creature, I feel like you kind of deserve to win at that point, or you deserve to have a pretty strong board presence.
So I think that this is a case where the thing that it is doing is interesting and fun, and that's why it being an outlier is a good thing. And yes, we can say, all right, you've went through all these steps, you did the thing, you played some Magic, you now have your big stupid creature on the board. At this point, you should be at least close to winning the game. And I think that it is interesting to take a card like this and say, how am I going to get the squeeze here? Where am I getting the juice? And when you're trying to figure out what your outlier card's actually supposed to do, I think that this is a perfect example of that. Yes, you can play it for 5 and just have a 5/5 reach trample. But if you play it for 4 beforehand and then just wait, then you can potentially get another creature to come in bigger than what was originally planned. And keep in mind, that still costed you 4 mana the previous turn.
Exactly. And then 5 mana to cast it. Let's say you play it on 4 mana. What if you don't get that 5th mana? What if you don't have other creatures? I think there's a lot of conditions on this.
Yeah.
And I think it's
not
amazing.
quite time walking yourself in order to pull it off. But you are spending a lot into this in order to get it to do its thing in a limited environment, especially when, mana is a limited resource in that environment.
Turn 4 is a pretty critical turn as well on a lot of cubes, right? By the time you're getting to turn 4, and maybe, heaven forbid, you've got some treasures and you're not just, you're actually able to, accelerate yourself a little bit. So if you're not actually adding to the board on turn 4, if you're just plotting something, as powerful as that is, there's that window that's opening up for your opponent as well. So I think as much as this does exist at a high power level, in that, and if you want to put it at that 5 or that 4 in the Monopoly Cube, I agree. I think it's very powerful, but I think the fairness exists extremely well for a card like this.
Okay.
I agree. I think that that's just a good example.
Without other creatures, this card is just a 5/5 reach trample, which is fine, for the stats. But
I'm not going to feel bad playing it.
Where it really shines is when you can do some setup with it. As I said earlier, it's just
build around.
Yeah, the card is fun. I really like it. I think this card is fun.
I agree.
So let's talk about Gold Rush. For 1 colorless and green, you get an instant. Create a treasure token until the end of turn. Up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 for each treasure you control. So let's kind of take this in the context of the environment. So the Monopoly, for those that aren't familiar, featured at CubeCon 2024. It's a desert cube environment where I focus on treasures as being your fast mana. Everything else enters the play tapped. That's what you got for me.
You're fixing enters tapped.
Yep. That's what you're dealing with overall. So treasures are highly predominant. This is my Berserk. This was kind of flagged, but I needed something to wrap up games. I don't want stalemates. What do you guys think about this card in context of highly treasure saturated?
I think
I've never seen this
fine.
card before today.
I have seen this card.
What is this card? I have never seen it before.
But I think that what it's doing is particularly funny. But it's going to feel so bad when it happens to somebody haha, I turn sideways. Oh, you don't block? Okay, good game.
Block next time. So
block next time.
Combat trick. Make combat tricks great again.
It's a wild combat trick, and it's so weird to have this in that orbit, but I think this is like a tier 5 for me.
Put it on your railway brawler.
I'm going to be honest. I don't consider this a tier 5, but I do consider this to be this is now a check on the opponent, because they're going to need to, the first game, you're going to get them. There's one game you're going to get them. but you won't get them again. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
you don't
It's
need
just-
to.
You don't have to be. So it's like
just
you gotta
hold up one
and what I
fluorescent
would
green
do
mana.
is I would personally side this out after I got them once. I would side it out completely.
Yeah, exactly.
Just put it in something else. It's like
It's like
So
you play spell
I do
pierce
think that
turn
there is a
one,
risk
round
reward
one.
to this card that makes it
course.
significantly more interesting than we're implying. And in a majority of other environments, like this wouldn't even be a think twice problem card anywhere else except for here.
Absolutely.
But when you get into position, because there's just so many treasure cards in this environment, so many ways to make treasures and so many ways to stack them up, because that's like the whole point of the cube, this can be a huge payoff for that.
Mhm.
And the important thing is not spending your treasures in order to kill someone.
Correct. That's my savings plan that I'm trying to do.
And I don't think that it's an outlier. I just think that it is a fun situational win card.
Yep.
I don't put this as a 5, maybe a 3 or 4.
Three
I know it
and a
kills
half.
somebody, but that's
Yeah.
that's what I- that's what I
3.2.
say.
Yeah, you got him. You got him.
3.2.
Yeah.
So let's move over to the Fey Cube. So I think we have
All right, here
one
we go.
that's a little decaying here. We've made the argument against Una multiple times. And I think I'm going to change my stance on it, but I did list it here. Would you mind telling the audience about Una, please, and what the inclusion means?
So Una is 3 Dimir for a fairy
Dimir.
wizard 5/5 with flying. You can pay X and Dimir to choose a color, and target opponent removes the top X cards from their library from the game. For each card of the chosen color removed this way, put a 1/1 blue-black flying fairy rogue creature token into play. So
Stonks.
what's important in the context of this environment is that for a lot of other environments, just getting out Una, 5/5 flyer, is just whatever in a lot of places. And if you're getting to the point that not only you stick Una, but you manage to mana dump that much into Una, then it's a huge investment for a lot of people. But in the context of the Fey Cube, that this is typically a slower environment. Getting up to the point where you can cheat Una into play, or ways that you can not only stick Una, it can be basically a game-winning card in blue-black.
Basically,
And I think that that's a good thing, because what it does is entirely unique to Una. Like, there are some decks that splash Una in just to get that top-end closing card, and I think that that's still a good thing, because what Una does is represent this kind of top-end, I don't want to completely say control piece, but
Powerband 5?
I personally think Una is just fine in this
Yeah.
cube.
It's
Based
fine.
on playing, I played it last time when you were down in the Raleigh area. I know I played.
Yeah.
I didn't draft it, but I did play a deck that had it in it. I think our good friend Nathan drafted it, and I just demolished somebody. I forget who I was playing, but I played Una in there, and it was just became
It's fine.
just a 5/5 flyer that just ended the game. And oh yeah, I milled a few cards, but whatever.
Yeah.
It didn't matter, and I have no problem with Una being in this. It's probably more like a 4 to me, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't consider it a 5.
5/5
I don't
flyers-
think it's a 5 at all in this environment.
It's a 4. It only
No.
gets a 5 because I beat Justin Parnell in one single game with this card. So that just like gives it plus.
Oh,
5.
it's a 10 then.
It's a
It
10.
is
It's
enough
gotta
that
be a
I would
10.
like. If I were to say Shivan Dragon would be like a step below this, I would say that what's more scary in this environment of somebody sticking a Shivan Dragon versus sticking an Una? Up for interpretation, I suppose. But
Una can make more 1/1s.
yeah, Una can make more
helps.
ones.
Do you need them to, though? I mean, 5/5 flyers just kind of win the game pretty quickly.
Yeah. And in this environment, flying can just steal games. And when one of the most powerful decks at the moment is Orzhov Party, which we will go ahead and highlight the reason why. Sorry to jump the script a little bit.
No, tell us
but-
about Nalia de Arnis.
This is the 5. This is the problem card in this environment.
This card is awesome. Yes.
Mhm.
It's 1 white and a black for 3/3. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard spells from the top of your library. Keep in mind, this counts changelings. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, then those creatures gain death touch until end of turn. This is huge in this environment, but the thing that it is doing, even though it is powerful, even though it's relatively easy to pull off, it is fun. It
Who is it fun
adds
for,
so much into the Fey Cube in terms of what party's supposed to feel like in here, in a way that you can't really get from a lot of environments. And I think that that's what's so important about it being in here, because this card is terrifying. Any 1 to 2 drop in your first 2 turns, right? Then you play Nolly on turn 3. Then you play a regular cohort on turn 4. You now have a full party. You now already get all of your +1/+1 counters. You already get a bunch of death touch on your things. It's genuinely a scary line of play. It came up the most in CubeCon last year.
I was going to say, as magical Christmas land as that specific instance may be, right? The fact that you've got 3/3 mana for 3, okay. Looking at the top card of your library any turn or any time, that's pretty good. The ability to be able to cast spells from the top of your library, that's really strong. And now the fact that you've got this gravy, I mean, it's not even just gravy, it's sausage gravy with a little bit of hot sauce poured over all the biscuits, of getting all those +1/+1 counters potentially. That is a bonkers amount of value for only 3 mana. Is this just flat at a 5, or do you think it angles a little bit on the 4.9, or maybe up in the 5.1, 5.2?
In the context of the Fey Cube, I think it's a 5. I think that this is the card that you need to be prepared to either play or play against. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, because setting up party is not easy. It is an intricate drafting process to say, I am going for a party deck, right? Eating the vegetables and getting enough changelings and whatever to pull this off, or even if you get to the magical Christmas land of 1, 2, 3, I now have full party. All of that aside, Nolly is already just strong just because of the value that she can provide.
That's my point. I think that's the point, right? You don't even need to remotely have a full party to get this kind of bonkers value from this card. The fact that you can even just cast stuff from the top of your library, that's 4 different creature types as well as changelings. It might not be super easy to get the party together, but do I really need to? Even if my deck is just full of rogues or full of clerics or warriors or wizards or any combination, I will say that when I look at this card, that last ability is such gravy that I'm not really that concerned about it. What I'm really thinking of is I just get to cast stuff from the top of my library and keep the pressure on.
I will note that a lot of the feedback that I got because of this card, it wasn't negative feedback. It was a lot of positive feedback. A lot of people really praised how good it felt to get the party together and actually get into a winning position with Nalia.
Except for Anthony.
In this environment, it's pretty easy to do.
Were those the players that played this card, or were they the players that played against this card?
A lot of the players that played with this card, the players who played against this card, have mentioned that they were a little pushed out, but they weren't feeling terribly about it.
Hi, my name's
Anthony. Just because it's a very aggressive deck.
This is Anthony.
Which is where I want to be.
He has been violated by both Una and Nalia. Anthony, say hi.
Hi. So if I had to put Nalia side by side with Railway Brawler, I guess what we're going to call it, where I think that's an outlier in the Monopoly, it required, as everybody agreed, setup, and it required thought process. Back to the argument, this is kind of just playing to the top of your library, getting value engine off of itself. I kind of saw this card, and I'm never going to tell you to cut this card, but I'm going to call this a solid 5.
That's Anthony saying you should cut this card. It's way too powerful.
Yeah, this card demolished me. Because once I went outside of your ability to do any form of removal, I was donezo. I mean, they just played Goblin, Rogue, whatever, and I'm just like, okay, cool. I can hit you. I can hit this for 2, but now this is a 3. This is where I stood.
I am going to cheat a little, because I know that we're doing 2 cards for the rest of these, but I do want to mention the outlier that did recently get added, which was Murderous Redcap. And I think that my reasoning is very in line with what we've been saying up to this point, which is, I promise, is leading up to our wrap up here. When I was being told about Nalia and seeing the stats come back of how good this deck was doing, I don't think that it was tier 0 or anything in terms of how good it was, but it was definitely upper end. It is the meta threat. What I did to evaluate and assess that and address that, knowing that this is the outlier, keeping this in because it creates interesting, fun decks that people enjoy, is giving other decks similar tools. So I gave Goblins the tool with Murderous Redcap and Grumgully the Generous. Now, Goblins have a 4-turn on turn 4 potential combo. Granted, getting a free sacrifice outlet's going to take an additional card in order to set that up, but if you manage to get Marsh Flitter, Murderous Redcap, and Grumgully all 3 on the board, at that point you've got it. Game's yours. Right?
I feel the same way in my peasant. I do the same thing. I give them the same tools that you're giving them. Same thing.
My question is,
and I think that's what's important when you're assessing the cards in your
though?
environment.
Is anything about that intuitive? Like that combination you just named of cards, do you think the casual player will notice that? Even in your case, Chris, like they've got 1, 2, 3
It's the same
setup.
combo. It's persist. They have to understand that a counter will go on it. I mean, the thing is, I'm assuming a basic level of Magic competency with my cube. I'm sorry, I can't super hold your hand through absolutely everything. So that's just I understand. That's how it is.
But take my hand. No, take my good hand. My other hand.
I don't expect you to be a pro, but I expect you to at least understand how to read.
Oh man,
In the big cube, it's a little bit more basic,
a
run to the ground, but I don't think that it's enough that you're going to get punished for not knowing that as much as not knowing about party. And that's also party's part of the whole introduction of this cube, right? If somebody managed to go out of their way to make the persist combos happen, which there are enough cards to do it, then good for them. But my point is that when I wanted to take these very intentional outliers, knowing what they're supposed to do with this within this environment, my goal was to give other decks the same tools, so that way I feel good about where those outliers are at. So that way, yes, these are big, scary, swinging cards, but other decks also have big, scary, swinging cards that are happening around the same time.
So as we kind of close this out, Chris, you're the guest, the pauper god, the peasant god. I want your thoughts on this orbit system that came out. Is the steps that we talked about that we skip over oftentimes. What do you think about like placing a value on a card in terms of a 1-to-5 ratio?
I mean, I do that sometimes. Like I've always looked at cards, and I know, you kind of have a feeling that this card is going to be probably super powerful. When you put things in, like I've definitely had cards cycle in and out of all of my cubes. That except maybe the vintage cube. That one's not really included in this because we're talking more about flat power levels. Correct. So when we're looking at that, there's always going to be a card that is going to probably be too much for the environment. Like in peasant, we have things like gut. We have things like skull clamp, isochron scepter, and in pauper we have things like pestilence and
monarch.
Coalition honor guard. Oh yeah, monarch, initiative. Oh my god, the fact that those exist at common blows my mind. The fact that those things exist at common. But when you're playing and a lot of people when they come to you with suggestions, a lot of them I've noticed are commander players who know that, what cards like Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is very powerful in Commander, but it is not the back-breaking thing that people can't come back from, if someone has a Skull Clamp and everything like that. But when you're doing 1v1, it's so different. When you're the one that has to deal with all the threats, you can't rely on your neighbor to handle everything. So I think rating cards like that, I do that kind of in my head, but not really I don't really think about it when I'm doing it. I just know that this card is probably going to cause problems. I will test most cards out, as you know, Anthony. I'll go and test a lot of different cards out and just realize eventually, like I ran gut for probably way too long.
And Mother Runes.
As it is. And no, Mother Runes is being, I have run it for way too long. But here we go.
Great commander card. You mentioned
Cheers to another several years of Mother Runes.
You mentioned commander players, but what about Dan players or Canlander players? How do they compare in their evaluation skills?
Canadian Highlander players are basically playing vintage in a singleton environment. Okay. That's kind of what they're doing.
Yeah.
You are in our play group.
And Dan players are just
Dan
having
players.
fun. That's good. Dan players.
They're here for the funny
Shout out
fish,
to
and
all
I
the Dan
respect
Dan
that.
players.
Hey, man. I love me some Dan. It's great.
So I think that's a good tie-off. What we really wanted to get out of this is it's okay to have power outliers. It's the acknowledgement, the flagging, the putting a pin in it, knowing that both player feedback as well as yourself. And you know when you put this card in, you're thinking, all right, well, this might be a problem. Like, it's hard to even look past that. Like, your inner compass is screaming, oh, man, Railway Brawler might be too good for this environment. Maybe I should listen to my players. I mean, it's happening as you're doing it. I did it with full knowledge that it was going to be a problem. But I think that's okay. I'm encouraging you to push this. But Stu actually said something that's pretty great. I'm telling you not to do it too much. When you talked about the heartbeat earlier, you know, it's going across the was it kg monitor?
EKG, yeah.
EKG.
Yeah.
And it's kind of boop,
Yeah.
boop, boop.
And
We're
then it
talking
goes
about
flat. Then it goes boop.
We're talking about the boop. So the distribution of the boops, if we're going to call it that, right? Like, and intentionally actually putting them across the different spectrums of your color properties, right? So red should get a boop, white should get a boop, but I don't think you should just have like one color tilting that has all the boops. That's. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes. You be careful of the
Totally agree
boops.
with
The boops are dangerous. So just distribute these
want too
equally, have your power bands, and I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, I was going to say, I totally agree with what May was saying. You just try to give if you're going to have high power cards, give other decks the ability to do kind of the same thing.
Yep.
And usually it'll even itself out. Eventually, also the best deck people figure out what the best deck in your cube is, and then eventually that deck doesn't start coming together because everyone tries to draft that. Everyone ends up with really crappy half decks of what it is, and that's what's happening in my peasant cube because a lot of people are trying to draft
Mother of Rooms.
the black red stuff or the Mardu stuff.
Spirits in the horde, because Stu won't stop talking about it.
And we've had a few people take advantage of that and then draft what has now become the monster of the format too. So it's like,
Junt.
you know,
Have
So,
fun
like,
with it. Experiment.
evidently
It's
gruel,
okay to play
yeah.
with power level. It's okay to add
Absolutely.
outliers. In fact, we encourage it.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Play with the busted cards. Try to play with the busted cards until everyone yells at you to take them out.
And
And
then
don't listen. Like
And then
about Mother
don't,
of
yeah. And then say, screw you. I love Mother of Rooms. She's a poster child for my cube. Damn you and your games.
Can't wait for Giver Runes to get like pushed down.
To hell with your
Master
feelings.
set next year. All right, so let's go to the socials.
All right. First of all, as always, to all of our Patreons, Timber Dragon, Brian Christensen, Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nicola Point, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Big thank you to all of you guys.
Thank you to Stephen Conefall for sending me these sweet cards. Sent me a copy of Tariff for my Monopoly Cube. So
Stephen Conefall just should have his
he's-
own little shout out
he-
section.
100%. Stephen, sorry, Stephen.
So much support.
He's a humble individual.
He is.
He's got to get all the love.
And,
from
and
us.
he's just
an
doing
amazing
God's
human,
work every
yeah.
day. Absolutely. If you would like to get in on the Cube discussion, you can check out the Magic the Gathering Facebook drafting page at facebook.com/group/MTGCube, where our own resident host, Mr. Anthony Adams,
This guy.
is a moderator. Careful.
Yep.
You know, keep your hands off.
Band Hammer.
As always, we would truly appreciate if you enjoyed this episode or any of our others, hopefully all of our others, give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. You can check out our autosleeves.com/UberCube affiliate link if you would like to support the channel, get 5% off your purchase, as well as our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link. Go and check them out for dice bags, mouse pads, all kind of custom and large volume products available for your Cube experience. If you would like to reach out to us via the socials, hit us up on Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also hit us up via email. You got a longer question or comment about the episode or your cube or anything else, reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. Go and check out the Discord. Keep posting those decks on that Deck Boast channel. It's phenomenal. We're seeing some really spicy stuff going on over there. And again, if you would like to support the channel, go and check out patreon.com/UberCube for ways that you can support the channel. Keep the lights on. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And then other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here, cut Mother of Runes.
Mother of Runes, happy
cubing. Hey, so
Never gonna live you down,
Never
never
gonna
gonna cut
take my
you
mother rest.
up.